Election tomorrow, of course.
Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. Each week we talk to people active in business and the economy about the big issues driving growth and jobs in the north of England. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, one of the UK's largest motor retailers. You can look at its website at virtuemotors.com. I'm Graham Robb of Recognition PR. We help scores of businesses promote their products and services, and some are featured on this podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcasts and Amazon and Spotify. In the studio today, we've Caroline Moody, Managing Director at Moody Logistics. And down the line, we've Alison Thane OBE, who's the Chair at Sage Homes. And later, my colleague Josh Havican will be speaking to Martin Cramond, a Director at the Carney Consultancy. Well, firstly, welcome my two guests, two very accomplished women based in the north of England and doing different things. But as we'll see later in the programme, they do have a shared interest. So if I can talk to you firstly, Caroline, Moody Logistics, it's a family-owned business and it's into road haulage, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Tell us a little bit more about the kind of work that you undertake.
Okay, so we're a family business, been established since 1947. It was actually my grandfather. In the early days, it was very much involved in the coal mining industry and hauling coal and grain. Now we entered that new industry that was developed about 30 years ago in the overnight delivery of pallets throughout the UK. That market that developed around the just-in-time model that came into businesses. So that's our main focus now, is warehousing, storage and pallets distributed throughout the UK.
And what size? I've seen your lorries on the road with Moody Logistics on the side, but what size of fleet do you have?
We operate about 33 vehicles at the moment, mainly 18-tonners and Arctics between the two.
And are they on the road all the time? Have you managed to get the productivity well up?
Yeah, we predominantly operate Monday to Friday and mainly based in the northeast, although we do have 20% of our vehicles are throughout the UK as well, but we're very much northeast based firm.
Now, moving goods and storing goods is a bellwether of the economy. So how would you say the economy is doing based on your own activities?
Yeah, I would say it's getting slightly better now. We've had such a roller coaster really ride through the storage areas and in distribution, where we've had sort of famine and feast, lots going on. Like we saw just a year and 18 months ago, the massive need for lots of storage and holding goods as logistics really was getting itself back on its feet after COVID. People were storing a lot and you couldn't get any space anywhere. The opposite seems to have happened in the last sort of year. That's really slowed down as firms have pulled back on the stock that they've held and stored and trying to get themselves back more into that just in time. So I would say on the storage and warehousing side, it's definitely slowed down and compared to where it was 18 months ago. But I would say the transport side's just starting now. It's been fairly good Easter and hopefully we'll move on from here.
Now, you were on this podcast a couple of years ago because there was a huge problem recruiting lorry drivers, HGV drivers, the qualified personnel you need, because these are big bits of kit. You need to have all the qualifications. What's the skills recruitment space like now?
As far as drivers are concerned, great, no problems. I mean, we were very fortunate. We never had a shortage of drivers. I feel we look after them well and, we didn't find that issue. But to train a lorry driver, really, it can be fairly quick because you've got to get them through their tests, and that can be done in a variable short space of time, a couple of months really. So that's not the issue. The issue is more in the skills sector of fixing the trucks, the vehicle technicians. There's a massive skill shortage there in the whole industry across UK. And the problem with that side of things is it takes a lot longer to train an HGV technician. You're looking at 3 to 4 years, and it involves people have to go into college to learn things alongside what they do hands-on as well. And that's a much bigger skill shortage. I think everyone's struggling to find the vehicle technicians.
Now, you wrote to the Minister of State for Skills and Apprenticeships and Higher Education to raise this issue. What did you want him or her to do about it?
Well, I feel the government puts a lot of money towards young people straight out of school into that sector or into a lot of training into that. What we've actually found ourselves when we've tried to run our own sort of apprenticeships and training in that area is it seems to be nowadays more of a job that people are suited to later on in life, maybe is in their, later years, late 20s, 30s, etc. Often career change people, when people decide a little bit later on in life they want a career change. And I mean, vehicle technicians nowadays, they can be earning £50,000 plus. It's a really well paid job, and I don't think that's known out there. And the young 16, 17-year-olds that used to come into this industry just don't seem interested. So I would like the government to make it easier for us as businesses to attract people in their late 20s, early 30s who are maybe looking for a career change and want a more established career that can pay a good wage for a family and a mortgage, etc. But it's very difficult for people at that age to actually leave a current role and move into something new. So I think that should be where we're focusing, where attention is an industry.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about you. We talked about the business being established just after the Second World War, and it's being a family business. Now you've taken over the reins from your father. Tell us about how that came about and how you've made the fit work.
Well, sort of about 8-9 years ago, I kind of took over more formally as an MD. But it's what's nice with a family business is it's much more of a steady progression into it, I suppose. My dad would probably say he's been grooming me since I've been a little girl. I haven't always been in the family business. I have worked outside of that. And I think that's actually really key for people to do as well, not just always to move direct into a family business. So yeah, that's developed over the years when my dad slowly eased off and I've taken over more from him until really COVID came. And for him in his 70s, that was most definitely the time that he sort of stayed at home more and handed over the reins to us.
And did you make changes to the business, evolutionary changes? And was that an easy thing for your dad, that his daughter's making these changes?
No, it's not. It's not been easy. Yes, there are often times where, he'll say he doesn't feel that's the right way to go or whatever. And sometimes you have to have a leap out in faith and think, well, no, my gut's telling me this is right. But to be fair to him, he has let me get on with it and just have a go. And fortunately, it's still running well. So, that's, he's handed over okay for us.
Great. Now, I wanted to tell our listeners and viewers a little story, which I know you won't mind me telling. I put it in a newspaper article recently. I was with Caroline a few months ago in a cold January night, and we'd been to a business meeting at, I think it was the Entrepreneurs Forum, Caroline, if I remember rightly. And we were walking to the car park together, just walking side by side along the road. And there was a homeless man on the street, and I have to say I walked past, as many people do. Caroline didn't. She knelt down and talked to the man and tended to him and helped him out, and both of us got involved at that stage. And it became apparent that there's another side to Caroline. You also, outside of business, are a street pastor, aren't you?
Yes. Yes, my husband and I, after COVID, started to get involved with an organisation called Street Pastors, which is a worldwide organisation. But basically, they put teams out on a Friday and Saturday night. It's a Christian-based organisation, but from lots of different churches and denominations. And we're basically just on the streets to help anybody who might be vulnerable on a Saturday night, usually between the hours of 10 o'clock at night and 4 o'clock in the morning. We're out there just helping where we can.
It's marvellous work. And it was clear to me, I observed this firsthand, so I'm perfectly happy to talk about it in proper testimony. You actually have been trained to do this, and the way you approached the man on the street, who was in a bit of a bad way, was very kind and tender, but very practical as well. And as he uncovered himself from cardboard boxes, we could see that he was sleeping in a sleeping bag. And then under the sleeping bag popped a head of a dog, a very nice, friendly dog, I might add. And the man was only concerned with the dog and getting food for the dog, and he was very upset and distressed. He possibly, it's not for me, I'm not a professional, but he possibly had some mental health problems. But he wasn't stinking of booze. He didn't appear to be hooked on drugs. But he was holding his side and he was in pain. And it transpired that he'd been beaten up earlier that day, and his biggest priority was to find food for the dog, not for himself. And you established that he couldn't go to hospital because the hospital wouldn't let the dog in, and he couldn't find a home or a shelter because of the dog. Have I transcribed that right?
Yeah.
It was a big effort, and we did actually give him some money. So that's not something I would normally do with homeless
No,
people.
it's not normally nothing. Not that you would normally recommend that, but sometimes you just make a decision, don't you, at the time? So
That's right. We did make a decision. It was an educated decision.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
after your evaluation, not that
Yeah.
I could have made the evaluation. Now, after this happened, you told me about a new charity you and your husband have founded in the North called Core Foundations. And you recently had a launch event for Core Foundations.
Yeah.
Tell us what Core Foundations is.
We've set Core Foundations up as a homeless charity, again, a Christian-based homeless charity. It was really through my husband, Philip, who was doing some work in that sector and was working as a consultant alongside a charity called Hope into Action. And we found through the work he was doing, he suggested, well, why don't we get involved and do this ourselves in the Northeast? And really, we could do it in the area of County Durham where we live in Northumberland. And that's what we've done. And the main thing with Core Foundations is it's looking not just to house the homeless in a home, we're looking really to be able to provide that friendship and support to people, which the model is enabling the churches to house the homeless in a sense. So, that feeling you had when you saw this homeless guy, or a lot of people have, where they walk by because they feel, well, what can I really do practically? What we're trying to do with this charity is to enable people who have got that heart for the homeless to be able to do something practical and get involved with it in whichever way they can through us.
Okay, well, it'll go from strength to strength, and I'm going to come back to you in a minute after our next interview, because I'm sure that there is a common denominator here. Because Alison Thane is a long-standing friend of mine from many years back. You're chair at Sage Homes, Alison. You're based in Durham, but Sage is a national company, isn't it? Oh, we've lost the sound. Let's just... You're on mute, Alison. Could you unmute? Can you unmute? Alison, could you have a go at unmuting, and then we'll try again. It's just on mute in the corner.
I know.
There we are.
Sorry, man.
It's
Forgive
quite
me.
all right, Alison.
Forgive me.
We're going to start again. Look, can I just say, folks, forget that didn't happen. We'll edit it out of the recording. If you're watching the live, you've got to see it happen. Right, Alison, let me just remind people. So you're chair of Sage Homes. You've been in housing all of your life. From when you were a housing officer in a local authority. You're based in Durham, but Sage Homes is a national organisation, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is, Graham. And very interesting. As you say, my career was, I finished up as chief executive of Fabric and 13 housing based in Middlesbrough, as you know. We built that up. So what a great story from Caroline, because housing is more than just bricks and mortar, as we know, and some of those support services are absolutely critical for people who are really struggling. But actually, we're just not building enough homes. I mean, we all know that for every kind of tenure, whether it's supported housing or rented or low-cost home ownership, for instance. We're just not doing enough. The housing association sector, we did what we could, but there was always a feeling that we needed additional funding, not just government funding. If we're just going to rely on government funding, we're never going to meet the demand. And a few years ago, the legislation was changed to actually allow private sector investment directly, for-profit investors. Bear in mind that housing associations are non-profit distributing. Housing association make profit, but they don't distribute them. But the law allowed for investors to come in who would invest and make a profit. And that's where Sage Homes came in. One of the first kids on the block, 6 years ago. It's astonishing to me what we've done in 6 years. 6 years ago, Sage Homes was formed by two investors, by Regis, the minority investor, and Blackstone, the major investor, the biggest real estate investor in the world. And of course, in the news recently, because they've got an interest in the British Vault site in Blyth.
Absolutely.
So we're going to hear a bit more about Blackstone. And they decided that this was, on behalf of their investment funds, this was a good investment, which it is. Long stay, if you're in the business for a longer investment, a patient capital. We've got index-linked rents, largely, and a huge demand for the product. I'm surprised more private sector investors didn't get involved before. It was a big change for me, Graham. What did I know about private equity? And I had lots of anxieties. I was originally recruited to be one of two sector experts on their board, and I took a long time before I decided I would get involved, because I imagined that if they were interested in the profit motive, then that might well be at the expense of the support we give our residents, the kind of services we provided, the quality of the homes we provided. So I spent a lot of time questioning, particularly the Blackstone guys, just about that.
And that was a criticism in the trade, that for-profit investment in social housing wasn't something that was seen as normal, and it was somewhat frowned upon by the establishment figures in social housing. But we're 6 years on. To what extent do you think you can demonstrate that it has been successful and it has raised the game?
Well, hugely. First of all, our investors, and I can only speak for our investors, Graham, there were a few who came, who have rather dodgy business models, frankly, but remember that we're all regulated in the same way. I took a lot of comfort from that. The regulator of social housing applies whether you're a profit housing association or a non-profit. I took great comfort in that. Some of them came and went because they really didn't get that. But we have built, in 6 years, this is an astonishing story, from a startup, remember, we have now have 16,000 homes under our belt. Yeah, and another 10,000 in the pipeline. And these are, we don't, a lot of them are criticised for cherry picking the best residents, if you like, the least difficult, but we only take our residents from local authority waiting lists.
Right.
So we don't, we make sure that they can afford and can look after themselves and don't have additional support needs. But, it's just an absolutely remarkable story. And I've learned so much. I just wish I was still a chief executive when it's a lot of what I've learned, Graham, would have been more applicable, I think, to a chief exec role and chair. But it's been a great journey.
Well, it's not just been a great journey. I'll hold this up. This is an acknowledgement of the journey. This is a Sunday Times Non-Executive of the Year Awards. And the Non-Executive of the Year award in the private and private equity-backed businesses was you, Alison. And that's because you've taken a business and led a board to that level of success. And clearly the models work. Investors get returns, people get housing, and are there more planned? What's the pipeline of houses that are going to be planned in this model?
Well, we've got 10,000 that we have under contract. It's all with house builders. And of course, if house builders are not building, and there has been a big slowdown, then we're not able to acquire to the same extent. But one thing I've learned about working with these guys in private equity, my goodness me, do they work you hard. But the rewards are there for the executive. But it's constantly innovation. Think differently. If the house builders are not going to be building, how else do we hit our target? We're looking for 30,000 homes by 2030. That we're on target, but we're having to pivot all the time to make sure that we can still achieve that. And how quickly these guys can move is quite astonishing. And I've learned so much.
Now, I just want to flash up on screen the house price list, recent average house prices. And you can see in most areas of the country, there has been a little bit of a fall in the average house price, but they're still quite significant. The Northeast is at £155,000. I'm talking about Northern Business Podcast, so look at the North Yorkshire and Humber, £204,000. Northwest, £215,000. So there's a little bit of a spread, but around 200,000 is where the average house price is. Now, as a multiple of an average wage, that is quite a large multiple compared to the 1980s when I bought my first house, and probably when you bought your first house as well. The consumer wants house prices to steady away and to fall, but the investor wants them to be maintained because they're the assets they own. How do you square that?
Well, I mean, our focus is on affordable housing. So 60% of our stock is for affordable rent.
Right.
So that's fine. And I say the rents are regulated by the regulator of social housing in the normal way. We set the rent levels exactly as we would have done at 13 or Carbon will or any of the other housing associations. So that's based on affordability criteria. The other 40% of what we do is shared ownership.
Right.
And you know what that is, Graham. That's part buy, part rent. And that really is a super model. And it does bring home ownership affordable for people who didn't think they could afford it or haven't got the deposit. Of course, that's been a big barrier in recent years. So particularly since the government's Help to Buy scheme with the house builders that you may remember, that's come to an end now. People are looking for affordable ways into home ownership, and part buy, part rent, shared ownership really can provide that for them. So we're really pleased to be able to offer, depending on people's circumstances, what their aspirations are, what they can afford. We have got a project, I think, to help them on a private estate. Everything we do is with house builders on private estates.
Yes, because this mixed tenure estates is really important for you, isn't it? There's a philosophical attitude to it.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And, you know, there are estates of ours that we've worked on with house builders. You would walk out, you wouldn't know the difference. And of course, people really appreciate that too. They don't want to be stigmatized. Not that social housing, I don't think, has the stigma it maybe once had, but they really do enjoy living in an estate of mixed tenure, and it makes for better communities. Of course it does.
Now, you're chair, and I know that chair of an organisation like this, particularly with so many social housing projects underway, needs to make sure governance is good. What is your attitude to governance? What kind of rules do you bring to your chairing of the board meetings?
Yeah, and this was really the focus of the Sunday Times award. And of course, you know, the shortlists were full of amazing people, Graham. But, you know, I take the view that failure of business very often, whatever the business, in the public sector, the private sector, the voluntary sector, failures are often just failures of governance, aren't they? And we see some very high profile ones with the post office and others at the moment. So, as chair, of course, you know, you're responsible for that blooming business. And I'm astonished we haven't seen more, for instance, of the chair of the post office. We did see him briefly, didn't we? But that was somewhat disastrously. But,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure there's a separate conversation here. But as chair, you've got to be very clear that it's your responsibility. That business is your responsibility ultimately. You carry the can, and you're not there to manage it. That's what you've got your chief executive and staff to do. But you have to know what's going on. You've got to be there. You've got to touch it and feel it. And you know, I think the article in the Sunday Times, one of the conversations I had with the interviewer last year, because there's been some high-profile failures in the housing association sector too. The dreadful death of Al Walby in Rochdale through damp and mould, and we're still living with the fallout from Grenfell. So I tasked all my board members, we only got 7, so that's not too difficult. I tasked them with, in this last year, as part of their appraisal, to spend a day on the front line with doing whatever they wanted to do, with a member of staff on the front line. And we're visible, we're accessible. You know, you can't ever say that you know exactly what's going on, but you can get a good feel for things. Absolutely. And of course, you've got to build a team. You've got to build a great team the way you would as a chief executive. As chair, I've got to build a great team, a great board who are engaged, who work as a team, who challenge the executive, and challenge if they're not happy with the answer. That accountability is terribly important. But when you get it right, it does feel great.
Well, I'm very pleased it was acknowledged in the Sunday Times. It was lovely to see that feature staring me over my breakfast on Sunday a few weeks ago. Now, before we leave you, Alison, what did you make of this venture, Care Foundations? Is there a role as well for charities to help people who are homeless access the kind of accommodation that you provide and support them from within?
Yes, of course. I mean, the the purpose, really, isn't it? Is to support people into a tenancy of their own, or whatever their aspirations and their ability is going to be. And it's that care and support, and I think we've seen it. I mean, my whole career, I've been involved with supported housing, again, as you know, Greg, because you visited many of the 13 schemes that we did around the region, supporting people, whether it was youngsters coming out of care or homeless people, or the whole range.
And I always remember, Alison, to interrupt you just a little bit, because I want you to say this. I heard it, and it's always lived with me since 1996 when I first met you, that many of society's problems surround housing. That could be sickness, it could be mental health, it could be unemployment. It could be childcare and the importance of looking after children. Housing is right at the centre of all of those things.
It absolutely is, and we're still having the same argument about that. I'm sorry to say, completely. Whether it's educational attainment, which we don't do very well, or as well as other parts of the country, if you haven't got a stable, affordable, secure home environment, you can't really do anything else with your life. It's so fundamental, and we keep saying it. So I don't mind as long as the investment is ethical. I don't mind where it comes from, as long as we're providing good quality, secure homes and the right level of support for people.
Caroline, as I understand, the aim of your charity is also in due course to buy a house, maybe from Alison, who knows, but you would want to buy a house that would help.
Our homes, Carbon Homes, are supporting us with the first one, but it doesn't necessarily mean we would like eventually to have a mixture. I think that would be healthy for us as a charity, to not be reliant on one way or the other, but have a mixture maybe of investors, homes, for us to own a home, other social providers, have a mixture of it all, I think is our aim.
And one thing that you are going to do, I know, is to make sure that the tenancy agreements are flexible enough to support somebody who may be in their first job. Maybe they're going through a period where they're being evaluated in a job and they don't have enough money for a deposit, that kind of thing. That's where your charity really comes in.
Yes, it's getting away from that. That's sometimes where people think it's not worth them working, because by the time they lose benefits, they then can't afford a house. So as a charity as well, it's trying to support them through that whole process, if you like, so they can eventually, the ultimate is for them to live independently and be able to afford that housing and have it contribute to society in whichever way they can.
Well, look, Alison, Caroline, thank you for joining us. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. And don't worry, Alison, the people who are listening to this on the edit will not hear the little error we had on the speakers earlier on. Now, over to my colleague Joss Haverkin, who's been speaking with Martin Cramond, who's the director at the North Tyneside-based Kearney Consultancy.
Thank you, Graham. This week, I'm joined by Martin Cramond. He's a director at Kearney Consulting, which is based up in North Tyneside. Martin, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure.
Not a problem. So, Kearney Consultancy, it's a health and safety business, but I think it's a bit more than that. It's probably best for you to explain, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a health and safety consultancy, but I guess we've got many strings to a bow. We've got with fire risk assessors, we've got with ISOs, we also got with training facility. But yeah, it's a myriad of things. And as you can see with the barriers behind us, we've also got another string to a bow, which is Kearney CDM, who do the principal designer role.
So CDM, what is it that it's doing?
So Kearney CDM do the principal designer role under the construction design management regulations, and it allows, I guess, clients that peace of mind that things, i.e. the legislation's being followed appropriately.
All right, well, I was looking you up before I had a chance to speak to you earlier today, and I saw that things seem to be going well at Kearney. I think it was more than 60% up on your turnover versus the previous year, more than 20%, more than a fifth more clients than what you had previously. Why do you think it's going so well?
I think it's going well because ultimately our quality, one of our core values is quality. And in partnerships, a lot of our work comes from word of mouth. We're obviously doing a good job. We like to think we do a good job. And ultimately that's where our work's coming from.
Is there a particular industry or sector that's calling on your services?
Yeah, mainly we're focused on the construction sector, but we do dip our toe into other sectors such as manufacturing, some industrial work as well.
Right. So you're busier than ever before. That usually means you're going to have to take on some staff. And I know it's a really tough time for people who are hiring at the moment. But I think, as again, I was doing a bit of research on you, and you've launched something which is a little bit different with your graduate recruitment scheme. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe what makes it different, please?
Absolutely. I mean, one of our unique selling points at Carney Consultancy has always been bringing in young people. And where we're aware, and everyone talks about the fact we've got a massive skill shortage appearing in the industry. So we're trying to do something different. It works for us. We bring people in with little to very little knowledge in construction. We build them up. We mould them to be health and safety people. We like that because our work is quite niche. You know, we're in and out of different companies, so it seems to work with us. It has historically. So hopefully in the future it'll work for us as well.
But now, I can't help but notice, I've said you're a Tyneside-based company already, and you quite blatantly have a North East accent. Are these opportunities only up in the North East? Where is the business and where are the opportunities for younger people who want to join you?
Yeah, I mean, we are growing. There's no doubt about that. We're growing across the north now. The barrier, I guess, coast to coast across to the northwest. Mm-hmm. But we do follow where our clients work ultimately. So this has taken us down to London. We're basically across the UK at least every 4 weeks on a cycle. So there is potential for more work down south.
Excellent. Right. Well, I'll be keeping an eye out for what else is going to come from Carney Consultancy. Thank you very much for joining us, Martin. We're going to go back to Graham in the studio now.
Thank you, Joss, and thank you, Martin. Now, if you'd like to join us as a guest on the Northern Business Podcast, feel free to get in touch. Use LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. And if you've got something to say about the world of business and what's going on in the economy, we want you on this podcast. Thanks to my podcast producer, Harry Sinclair, and technical operator, Robin Campbell. Join us next time for the Northern Business Podcast. Don't miss an episode by rating and subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.